23 to 79. That's when he was kind of working and doing something. So he's just like a model for encyclopedias. He was also a Navy and Army commander, and he also was like a natural philosopher and naturalist. So he kind of like nature, science, all that kind of stuff. So he was kind of like honcho of research at the beginning. And then Vasari, from 1511 to 1574, he was an Italian painter and architect, and his work, Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, they were considered the ideological foundation of all art historical writing. So all of our art history books, he kind of started writing the history of art from the time he was alive going forward. The ones before him, like Leonardo and Michelangelo, because Leonardo was 67 when he was born, so they were around the same time, but he was already dead by the time he was alive and like writing stuff. So he went off based of other people's stories and words about it. A lot of the people before him, they have found a lot of his facts aren't really factual, but they still, going forward from when he was, they are more factual. So he kind of started keeping an art history, and a lot of our books now about art history are based off some of his writings and stuff like that. So he had a lot of errors in his stuff of people before him. And then you have Winckelmann from 1717 to 1776. Now, he was a German historian and archaeologist. And if you think about it, the Egyptians had archaeologists. Does that not, like, that blows my mind when I think of it, because they were around so long, and we'll get into them. They were around so long that they had archaeologists just like going through their stuff, and we think they were so long ago, but like they were really long ago. So it's kind of cool. Oh, sorry, I get off the topic. He was the first to articulate the differences between Greek and Roman work. A lot of people like slumped them together, but it showed he like was like, no, Greeks did this first, and then the Romans did this. Now, a lot of the Roman artwork are copies of the Greek artwork. That artwork was kind of destroyed with things happening, so they made a lot of copies of what the Greeks did and kind of have that. He countered the theory at the time, which held the link between the two, the Greeks and the Roman, as an initial property of the Greek idea. So he kind of made sure you could tell the difference between the Greek and then the Roman stuff. His theory is the practice of the best Greek artist. Okay, so what they thought about art, the best Greek artists combined the characteristics of natural things, and it draws us closer to the divine and elevates it above the human form. So you have the prettiest nose, you have the prettiest lips, you have the prettiest eyes, your hair is beautiful, your body is the best, your feet are the prettiest. So they take all of this, I'm just throwing things out of the sculptures. They would take all of these things and put them together to make the perfect divine human. So when we see Venus of Dilfendorf and all of those ones, they're an ideology of what the beautiful human form would be. No one is perfect, and that was what made them divine. Taking you closer to divine was putting all those perfect things together for the beauty of that. And you'll find a lot of Greek and Roman sculptures of leaders like Napoleon and all the like people in charge at the time. They're never what they look like at the time. It's always the younger, stronger version of what they were spread out amongst the different places. So when Napoleon was here and he conquered all of this, they would send out busts and statues of him in his youth to show their leader as a young, strong person, where he got older and older and not as strong, kind of a thing. So they always tried to find the most ideological human form to sculpt, okay? So, around this time, this is when art, instructional, academic places were starting to come about. So the academia, where Michelangelo created David and all that like that, they started making those places a whole lot more in that time, okay? So around that time, that's when it happened. It was around the 18th century when academic art places became widespread. So a lot of it is the discipline of art history today, divided into two basic categories. the context and the study of the form. So art criticism and beauty versus subjective opinion. So the beauty of like, this is what an art should be, and then what do you really think about it yourself, your individual opinion. There's two methods, how the art looks and the background in which it was made. So when we find artwork, if I were to put Venus of Vindelwolf, we'll see her in a minute, she's like a cave a very early Stone Age sculpture about this big, showing like fertility against Venus of Willendorf. They're two different time periods. So if we compare them, there's similarities, but you have to know when they're made, who made them, and why they were made, because something during the Greeks and something I make now might be similar, but the time difference are so vast, they're gonna say different things, okay? That's why a lot of times I like in art history, I show them the picture of the upside down urinal, and it says fountain on it, and people are like, why would they do that? But it was like a time in art history where you were taking something and making like a joke out of it, and like that kind of a thing. So it made a statement at that time. Nowadays, you might not think very much of that, but when that happened, it was like controversial all the way. Lots of controversy. And then the preservation and the environment of the culture and the climate where things are found will kind of make it harder to study things. So, for example, near the equator, the temperature is really hot and the climate is very humid, like the heat there isn't very great for preserving things, especially if you don't have an air-conditioned museum where you can control the air temperature and stuff in it. So a lot of art stuff from cultures around that time, like tribes and things like that, we lost a lot of that stuff because it like rotted and went away because they made it out of wood and leaves and things that they had. So when you study art history, you have to know who made it, where they made it, and the environment, and if the civilization was lost, like in the South Americas, a lot of that was lost for a long time because the jungle took over and hid it for a long time. So depending on where it's at and who was there, like the ancient Greeks, they loved art, so they made sure they kept it safe and things like that. So did the Romans. So a lot of times things get lost, like even right now in Rome, they're still uncovering underneath houses beautiful tile floors and stuff like that. Like they're constantly excavating in Rome. Like there's always art excavation going on because it's a city built upon a city, built upon a city, built upon a city, and it's like layers. And I've always read about it, but until I went there, like you don't realize how that happens, but it happens because you're like, there's a store right there, who's gonna build above it? But so much changes and things get built upon that it happens, because when they're excavating, you can see it's like down, you're looking from street level down, and you're like, how did they cover that up? Like I'm up a whole street level above it. And it's like amazing to see it in real life. As you're walking through, there's houses and then ancient Greek stuff right here, and you're like, oh my, like, how did they build that house right next door to that column? Like your brain, I just can't comprehend it. Even seeing it in person, it's like, oh, that's interesting. So that's the thing you gotta kind of think about. Who made it? Where did they make it? Why did they make it? What was going on during that time? Okay? Gosh, I love art history. I want to get an art history class. Do it. I forgot how much I love this and learning about it and remembering. All right, so there's 3 stone ages. So the real names of them are the Paleolithic, which means old. That's the animal cave paintings, and that's the bottom one with like the rhino looking thing, and then the fertility statues, that's the top one. So when you think about the time she was made, they only cared about eating, shelter, and continuing to live. That's their main 3 things. So she doesn't really have a face. It's just the body. When you think about childbirth, the belly, they breastfed, so the breasts are big, the butt's big, because it was all about having babies and taking care of and having new life and new life and new life. So when they knew that their women were pregnant and had a baby, their body changed, and they made a fertility statue to kind of show those things. So that's all they cared about, was eating and living and shelter to keep them alive. So those are the kind of statues that you'll see then. You sometimes see like little statues of animals because that's what they hunted. The cave paintings, animals, they're kind of deep in the cave. Sometimes they would use those. We don't know for sure, but they might have used them as rituals, like we're gonna go hunt, so let's go and draw the animals and that we're gonna hunt and kind of thing. So that's what they hunted, that's what they did. You'll see little figures that are like throwing arrows at animals, so we know that they use spears to throw at animals. And then it went into the Middle Stone Age, which is known as the Mesolithic human period. So that's where they had more caves and they would have more people in it, a few more. It started to get a tiny bit more realistic kind of a thing. And then the Neolithic, which means new, that's the stone monuments like Stonehenge and things like that. Now, we don't for sure know why Stonehenge was built. Some people think it was a calendar and things like that. So we just know they built it and that it's there. Just a few things. Dogs were domesticated during the Middle Stone Age, and they used them to hunt for food. So that's when they were domesticated. Animals that were around, kind of woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, mastodons, and the woolly rhino was around. One of the best preserved houses are in Scotland, and that was during the Neolithic period. They kind of found those. They had beds in them, they had tables in them, they had dice, so they know they played games. They were kind of like dice kind of looking things. And that was one of the best preserved places. And it was thought that in the early Stone Age, so I'm thinking like the animal cave paintings, the fertility goddess, scientifically, there were about 6 different types of humans. Not humans, but different types with the evolution of all of that. Now, Homo sapiens, which means wise men, were the only ones that were left at the end. Okay, so like Neanderthals and that's what I mean. Neanderthals were a type of human, but they weren't human. They had little characteristics. And then now that we do the DNA testing, we're finding some of that DNA in with Homo sapiens, so we know that they crossbred a little bit. So, but they all died off, and Homo sapiens are the ones that continued on. And that's like the early Stone Age kind of a thing. Let me make sure I got everything. Oh, and like we think it was kind of calendary with the Stonehenge, just because when they look at like astrology and the solstice and all the things that were going on, they feel like they used that like a calendar kind of to kind of help with those kind of aerial, spatial, I can't think of the word in my head right now, things that they use. Sorry, some of my words don't come to my, like they're in my brain, but they don't want to come out. And I am horrible at pronouncing things. When I taught art history, I would sit there and have the computer say an artist's name. Some of their names are like different languages. I would be like, blah, 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 blah. And then like before class would start, and then, so if I mispronounce something, don't hold it against me. I kind of, that's the third one, sorry, I forgot, like there's little typing things. All right, so ancient art, right around, after kind of the Stone Age, we start to see buildings, and some of the first ones are like this one in the bottom. I don't know if I clicked that one. It's a ziggurat, which is like a tiered pyramid. So it goes up, in. It's like a step pyramid kind of. Very similar to some of the ones in South America that we would see down there in the Mesoamerica kind of stuff. But that's around 4,000 to 2150 BCE. That's when those were constructed. And then Babylon, here, that first one there, they found the monumental work, which was the Code of Hammurabi. Do you guys know what that is? Yeah? Okay. So it's the oldest full legal code that has been preserved, 1792 BCE. And it appears on a slab at the top of a really tall kind of pillar kind of a thing. And the second one is that one right there with the figure, and what that is Hammurabi receiving inspiration from the sun god. So that's what that is. It's him getting from the sun god the code to give everyone the code so they follow all the laws. Okay? And then we know the Egyptians, they're well known for their sphinx and their pyramids, their mummies. That's ancient Egypt, and like I said, ancient Egypt in itself has periods and many kings, and they kind of go through. The Egyptians believed in the different, like the sun god, you see that. They believed in the afterlife. Have any of you, when I was younger, they had this big thing at the end, Museum of Natural History, where it was like all about Egypt and they had mummies and all that stuff. Do they still have some of that up
They
there?
do, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really cool because you see like the little mummies to the big mummies, and it's just really neat to watch. But they have so many periods where they had, like, the Sphinx was built before this, and this was built before that, and like the different things. And when we see the pyramids now, we just see the sandstone. It's believed that they had a substance on them that was reflective like a mirror. So imagine those with like a mirror going up the side in the desert. The sun hits that, and that light is shining from afar all around, because they were kind of in an oasis right there by the Nile. So it's all luscious and green. Right now it's not green right here, but right by the Nile, it was all luscious and green to where they could farm and live, and it wasn't the harsh desert, which was not too far away. So it was kind of like a special little haven in there. But they believed, and there's gonna be an example of the hierarchical, where if you're more important, you're bigger in an artwork, and when you're not as important, you're smaller. So we know by looking at their hieroglyphics, the important people, who they are, because they're bigger. And there's an example in a couple slides here, okay? And then if you wanna know more about a certain period, like you're like, I have no idea what this is and why it's important, just let me know, shoot me a message, and I can like make notes and find that information before we meet again. Ancient art too. So Greece, they're known for their columns on their buildings and stuff, and it's 3 different time periods. So you have the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. The Doric is the basic column with just the flat at the top. That's the earliest one. And then every time period, they kind of got a little more fancy. So the next one is the Ionic, which goes and it has the spiral on the side. So if it's got that spiral, you know that's the middle time period. And then when it goes to the leaves, they kind of go flippy and go like this. It's like the leaves coming up. That's the Corinthian, and that's the last. That's the most fancy. They got more fancy as they went along. So imagine being an architect. You're young, you're just learning how to build, you do basic post and lintel, and then as you get better in your career, you get better. That's what happened. Building, they got better at building, and then they got better at building throughout the time. Not just person, but time period. And they were centered in Athens. So we know we have that, that big hill in Athens where all those beautiful places are. The Parthenon, which you're gonna hear the Parthenon and the Pantheon. The Parthenon is on Acropolis. That's up on that mountain with all the other buildings. Remember, it has the R in it, the Parthenon, okay? When you go and visit that, the city is down here and you go up and it's like going up to the hill with all the gods. And we know about Greek mythology. You guys all good with like Greek mythology and stuff? The different gods that they had. And they kind of built places for those people. But they had, when they first started, it's kind of hard to see, but the Parthenon has like a middle section and then a row of columns, and then another section and a row of columns, and then another section and a row of columns. That's because they were heavy and the columns were support on the inside. So you're gonna see the Greeks had a lot of like real close because they had to support all that heavy stuff above them. And then as the Romans discover cement, those spaces start to get bigger and bigger because cement's gonna allow us to have more strength so we can have more open concept. So think closed concept to open concept with the invention of concrete, okay? Now, the concrete, there down in Rome, that's where we start to get the arches. So they have the aqueducts where they can carry water and they can move it around. So that concrete helped them make those big aqueducts. And then the Parthenon, the Pantheon, which is in that bottom corner, it's got that real great that facade. Now, when you first see this, you see that on the outside and you don't think how magnificent it is when you walk in. So you see that outside. And back in the day, they probably didn't have all the buildings around it, so it was like this big building. Now it's in the middle of the city, and the way the streets are, they're not straight. You kind of just come around a corner, and it's like right there in the square, and you're just like, oh my gosh, and it's right there. And like I literally came from this corner and saw it this way, like the same way it is. And you walk up and you see the columns, and then you kind of walk and you walk in, and it's this big, open, beautiful thing. We're gonna get into it because it's one of the pictures, one of the artworks, so we'll get into it a little bit more. But it looks like a painting on the inside. You think the ceiling is painted on. It looks so surreal. I literally cried when I walked in, and I will not admit that, but I was just like, I can't believe I'm here, because I know the history of it, and I know how many great, amazing people have been in that building, and it was like an honor to be in there. I know millions of people walk in it every day, but I never thought I would ever see it. So you walk in, and it's just gorgeous. So from the outside, see how there's that little dome at the top? If you take a sphere and put it in there, it would fit perfectly with that, like it fits perfectly inside there. So by coming up with concrete, where they were able to do these beautiful domes, and you're gonna see this is one of the first ones. As we study the churches, those domes get taller and wider as we go. So they were small, and they're just gonna slowly grow to these magnificent things. We went at Vatican City, and we went to St. Peter's Cathedral, and you can go to the top of the cathedral, you can take an elevator there, and then you go to the bottom of the dome, and you walk up the dome to go to the top of the dome, and you think you're, like when you go in the church, it's very huge, but when you get just to the bottom of the dome and you look down, the people are like this big, and you're like, oh my gosh, I was just down there. And then you get to the top of the dome, and you're like, holy moly, like this is, I am way up there, and you think you're never gonna and as you go in, like this was the hallway, and then it slowly, and you're going upstairs, it slowly kind of came in at you like this, and it was really just neat to walk through that dome up to the top. So it was magnificent how big they got these domes to be. The Greeks and the Romans were about the idealistic human body, whereas the Egyptians, most important was bigger, smaller. So that was kind of one difference between the two cultures, and we'll kind of get into that here. So you can see who is the most important person. He's all the way on the left over there, okay? And then as you go through, you can see who's important and who's not and who's smaller, okay? So they use that, those hieroglyphics. Now, the hieroglyphics, we couldn't read a whole lot of them for a long, long time until they found, gosh, what's the name of it?
Rosetta Stone?
Yes, the Rosetta Stone. I was thinking the Hammurabi's Code. That was in my head. So once they found the Rosetta Stone, they were able to decipher a few different languages that we were stumped on. And it was like a really amazing finding, because we had these pictures, but then we figured out what went with the pictures, and it kind of helped us out a lot. It's really cool, the hieroglyphics, because they give a lot of day-to-day life. Like we have hieroglyphics of people doing pottery. We have hieroglyphics of people weaving stuff. So we know that they did these things, and they showed it in their artwork. They showed everyday life and then important people and things like that. So hieroglyphics were super, super awesome and cool. And then the Greeks, they were really into the human form, that contrapposto pose. There's that little S curve in there. At first, some of the early sculptures, the humans are kind of a little more stiff, like their legs are together. They might have like a little step forward, but they're stiff and together and like this because they carved from marble. And then when you're, that's not quite there, but when you're driving from, when you're driving from Rome, going to Florence, everything's made out of marble there, the cathedrals, like parts of the street, like things. When you're driving through, you can see the mountain and you can see the white in the mountain, and you might think it's snow. Like if I wouldn't have known, I would have thought it was snow on the mountain. It's the actual marble where like it came from to go make these places. So like as you're driving by, you see the marble places off the expressway so that they can ship it, but you see it in the mountain and then they bring it down and ship it wherever. So that mountain has produced beautiful artworks everywhere, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, because you don't think about where it comes from, and then when you see it, you're like, we just drove 3 hours, or 2 hours, and they took that marble from there all the way to there to build this cathedral, and it's just mind-boggling that they did that way back when. Oh, but, so they were here, and they were kind of stiff, arms down, and then you see this guy, he's stepping forward, his arms are a little more free, he's not as stiff. It's because they started to get that S curve and that step forward, and then if you see on his back edge there's that tree, and that's kind of holding, it's like a stump. He's kind of connected to that to help support it, and then his arm's got that little piece there. Eventually that little piece kind of disappears because they start to know how to like shape it to where it's not gonna break or fall apart and stuff. Contrapposto, that's a word they might use, is contrapposto. When I took my test, they talked about that a lot. They also talked about Greek vases a lot, and the stories. Basically, the Greek vases told stories. Like, that was the important thing I remember from that test when I took it for a teacher. But the Greeks and the Romans had a really huge influence on sculptors in the West. Okay. The Byzantine and medieval art. So this is the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s and the flourishing of the Renaissance in the 1400s. So between here and there, like the Romans are falling, so people are kind of just living like between those two time periods. So this first image is the Byzantine. It's the era where the Roman Empire continued a little bit. Like it took a long time for it to fall. So it continued, but it wasn't as strong as what it was. It's known for its churches and its mosaics. Now you're gonna see like the Hagia Sophia over there on the bottom. It's really small, condensed. The windows are teeny tiny, and it's like more thick. Okay, so it's like a real thick building. The walls are probably really thick to show those little domes. So it's got a dome in it, and it's cool, but they have really thick walls and really tiny windows. So it's kind of darker inside. It's cool, but it's kind of darker. So that's what the candles on the walls and all that are for. And then the mosaics on the walls. So that painting up there is little pieces put on with the mosaics. It's got the, and that's in Constantinople. The medieval period, that is known for the illuminated manuscripts. So back then there weren't printing press yet. So they would actually write the books by hand. Like they would simply just copy them. And to make them a little more interesting, they would do these illuminated manuscripts that were beautiful drawings. So have you guys seen them like in books, like the first letter's real big, fancy, maybe with some gold leaf on it. So that's what they're really known. That's where the illuminated manuscripts kind of come from. Religious books, they were preserved by monks in monasteries. So a lot of times the monasteries had all these books. They would just spend their days copying down. That was their life, to copy this book so I can send a copy over there, copy this book so I can send a copy over there. This image up here at the top is from a Corinthian gospel. This time period is also known for the widespread establishment of churches in every town and city. So the church is starting to become the main thing, and who's going to be in charge, which happens towards the Renaissance. So it went from leaders to like the church is going to be in charge of everything. It kind of starting to, it's the beginning of it's taking over of like government kind of a thing a little bit. This led up to the Gothic style with the pointed arches, and then the flying buttresses and stuff. So we're going to start to see the church on the left, small, thick, small windows, to the church on the right, which this one is in France. Okay, so this one is beautiful. You'll see you have these big, tall, the windows are huge. You have this big rosette window in the middle, starting to get really tall in height. So this is a 1, 2, 3. This is a 4-story, 5-story building with an attic. So about 6 stories right here. And we're in the middle of the church. I don't know if you can see my arrow right there. So right where that roof hits that's like 6 stories tall right there. And then it still goes way far up. So these flying buttresses, so now they've understood that those flying buttresses, they can build those walls taller, support them from the outside, which opens up the inside to be huge and grand. And then you start to get those bigger, taller, really tall. That's where the stained glass windows are going to start to get bigger. More light is coming in, and it's magical when you walk in because the light shines through all the lights, and you walk in, or the windows. The light shines in through the windows, not through the lights, and it's magical as you kind of go in. So the architecture goes from heavy to lighter and lighter as they understand, like bridges. When you guys were younger, I'm sure you guys have built a bridge in one of your classes with toothpicks or popsicle sticks, and you understand that if you just do basic, it cracks, but if you angle things and support things, it gets better and better. So once they understand how things can be supported, they can start to get bigger and more grand. You'll find during this time, a A lot of the art is about the churches and making them huge and grand. Okay, the European Renaissance. This is the 1400s to the 1500s. So first, Brunelleschi had a tremendous impact on art by inventing single vanishing points, which is linear perspective, at the dawn of the Renaissance. So they're thinking one day he was just standing looking out the window, and when you look out a window at the end of a street going down, you're like, oh, everything goes to that water bottle right there. It all angles in. If I draw a line that way, it angles in. And they understand perspective. So slowly, and this doesn't show you like, my art history book, I can show you like the beginning of the Renaissance, how it's kind of rough and you can see the lines. Think about when you first learned to draw perspective in like first, second grade, third grade. It's kind of rough. You might draw a line and it doesn't go to the vanishing point, but you know there's a side there. That's what they were doing. They knew there was a side to the building, but it wasn't always perfect. So once they started to understand vanishing point, things angle to the point, and where the lines go, because in art, linear perspective is the most mathematical thing in my mind, because there are rules and you got to follow those rules. Verticals have to stay vertical in real life and on your paper. Horizontals have to stay horizontal unless they're angling to a point in 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, and whatnot. So there's rules for the different 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point, 5 point perspective. There's 5 point perspective that you have to follow. So once they started learning those, their paintings and their drawings and their artwork started to get way more realistic. Side note, I just bought a tool. David Hockney wrote a paper when I was in high school that was very controversial. And he said that these Renaissance artists weren't as amazing as we thought they were. They were really good, but they didn't freehand everything. This tool is basically what they use. So think of it as a camera in a room. So if I'm an artist and I have a window, a camera works because there's a spot that you let light in, it shines on a paper, does the image, and you close the shutter. So it's like a shutter. So they use that technology, once they figured it out, to project their drawings onto walls and draw them. Or with this thing, and I'll pull it out and show you guys at one point in time. I'll pull up a little thing and print it off of this study that he wrote to kind of show you. But basically, it's like this thing you put on a table, and they probably used a room or a curtain with a thing to project. And you put it down and you can kind of look through it and it projects an image here and you kind of trace what you see, but you gotta get the like timing right. It's not like the computer where you just trace the line. You gotta kind of draw, but you can get super good detail drawing freehand with this thing. So it's kind of tracing without tracing on top of it. And he's saying that they did that, like they made a photo box, a camera, and they projected their image, took it, and then just painted it. So he's not saying they cheated all the way just to get the drawing perfect, and then they had to paint and, you know, add the color. So they were still very, very artistic. It's just they weren't perfect, kind of a thing. I'll share that with you guys. It's like a little side note you really don't need to know, but I know it, so I'm gonna share it. Donatello is considered to be the founder of modern sculpture. And this is his sculpture of David. Now throughout time, many sculptors sculpted David. His is very famous, Michelangelo's is very famous. Everyone goes to Florence to see the statue of David. They have a bunch of fake ones throughout the city. You see one when you're coming in, you stop at an overlook, they have a statue of David, and then they have Florence behind you over here, and it's beautiful, and you're like, oh, the statue of David. But it's not the real one, it's just a fake one, but you still take pictures anyways. Then you go to Florence and you're walking around and there's a big, not courtyard, there's a big opening in the buildings, and then there's a statue of David instead of the Medici, in front of the Medici's place in their house. But you're like, that's not the real one. And then you go to Academia, which is where the museum where it's at, and you walk around and it's beautiful. You come around the corner. So imagine you're coming from that way and you come this way and you look this way, and you have Michelangelo's slaves. He's got like 6 of them, and there's 4 of them here. They're sculptors that he sculpted. And then you have 2 of them here, 2 of them are in Vatican City, and you look right there, and that's David. And he's so magical and beautiful with this light shining on him. And he's so tall and big, and you're just like, oh, I'll show you guys pictures. But so David is somebody that they sculpted a lot because David and Goliath, the weak young guy overtaking the big giant. It's a story for all of time. So he's considered one of the first founding sculptors. Now remember that Greek sculptor I showed you? See how this one, he's got the little curve in his body? That's the S curve, that contrast. Contrapposto. I don't want to confuse you. Contrapposto. So there's that. And then Botticelli, he is famous for the birth of Venus. So you have Venus coming in from the ocean in a shell. You don't see the whole thing right here. Unfortunately, I was in Florence, but I couldn't see this one in person because I couldn't get tickets into the museum because that wasn't on our tour and they were booked up. The lady tried so hard. She's like, I'm trying so. I'm like, you're okay, you're good. But I just went to the wall and I'm like, I know you're on the other side. Because you can walk by it in a minute. But Botticelli did this beautiful, it's the rendering of Venus coming in from the ocean, the birth of Venus. And it showed the renewal and interest in the ancient gods. So remember, the Greeks were a while ago, then the Romans, and there was all like the churches were kind of in charge a little bit, and they're still in charge, but now it's like a rebirth of the Greek gods and who they were and what was going on. So it's kind of the influence of the ideal feminine beauty for the generations, the detail, and the birth of Venus. And then we have Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. And this one is so famous, and she's literally the size of that locker with her frame. That locker right there. And you walk in this room, and there's ropes along the side. So the room is probably maybe 4 more feet both direction. And there's a walkway on the sides. And from there, there's a rope that goes back and forth, like you're waiting in line at the airport to go to the checkout in the front, back and forth, all the way, probably more that way. And there's artworks on the wall, beautiful, huge artworks on the wall. The one behind Mona Lisa, back here on this wall, is probably 3 foot higher than my ceiling, going across that wall, all the way down to maybe 2 foot above the floor and across. Huge. And our tour guide was like, you would think like people would look at that one and just remember, look at Mona Lisa, but turn around. She's like, the painting on the wall is bigger than my apartment in Paris, France. Like, she's like, it's bigger than my apartment. And so all the kids, of course, we looked, they're like, her apartment's that small. I mean, it's big, but like, it's on a wall. So they're like, her apartment's tiny, but that's how they are. So like, you have all these people facing this way. And she's just right there in that little frame right there. You think she's this big thing, right, but she's just this small little beautiful painting. And like, people wait 2 hours just to get to the front to get a picture. I was like, I don't have time for that. So I went up the side, went click, and then kept going. But I was like, oh, there's so much to see there. But this is Leonardo da Vinci Mona Lisa. This was during the High Renaissance. And this is the smafuto. So that's where they kind of put that hazy, smoky in the background. And it's in the portrait of Mona Lisa. So it's just a famous because people are like, it's mysterious kind of a thing. That's kind of why it's famous. And then we have Michelangelo. So he was a sculptor to begin with. He wanted to sculpt. He's really famous for a lot of sculptures. One at the Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica is the mother and child. So it's Mary and it's Jesus laying across her arms. And he carved that when he was 23 years old. He didn't sign it to begin with. And then he snuck in to St. Peter's and carved his name on it because somebody else was trying to take credit. So he went in and he signed his name. And he's like, my name is on it now. But he did that. He did the statue of David. He did many other statues. But then he was commissioned to do the Sistine Chapel. So when you go to the Vatican, it's like Vatican City. So it's the smallest country in the world because it's its own country. There's so many, I think there was like 2,000 something people that live there, if I can just remember. And you go in and there's like walls around it this way, all the way around it, except for St. Peter's Basilica. There's walls and then there's buildings, and it's open to like the street. When you come up, you can come up to St. Peter's, but you can't go in. You can go into St. Peter's if you have tickets and pay, but like they have security in front of that. But you go in over here to Vatican City, and you go through with like the visitor's entrance, and you come up, and there's like a museum that you walk through. So you kind of come in, there's a courtyard, and then you go in, and you go down these hallways, and you walk down these hallways, and there's just Greek and Roman sculptures up and down the hallways and tapestries, like the most beautiful tapestries. From here, imagine the West Annex to the end of the school over there, just one long hallway of just tapestries hanging above you, on the side of you, and it's all lit up so pretty. And then you kind of come around and you come through and you go down this little hallway, like this little staircase, to the Sistine Chapel, and they say, put your phones away. You're not supposed to have your phones in the Sistine Chapel. So see those windows on the side? They're darked out. So they don't want sunlight to go in there because it messes with the paint. So they want to protect it. So the only time they kind of open those windows is when like they're doing a new pope or they're doing some kind of service in there. Otherwise it's open to the public and it's dark. Like it's lit up enough to see the paintings, but it's not like bright like this room is. So you come in, they shut the doors, and they are like, silento, silento, and everyone just gets real quiet because they speak in Italian, silento, and you're like, oh. And you just look up and you're like, wow, because you know it took him forever to paint it, and it's beautiful, and you kind of like walk, and I always had to keep reminding myself, the Pantheon, that was real carving. He painted on. So those things up there, it's a flat ceiling, and those things are painted on. Those aren't like marble on there, it's painted on. So he painted it to look like it was carved. So it's like even more magical. Like when you look at it, like he painted almost all of those details in there. So it's not just those paintings in the middle, it's the connections across. It's all painted on. So he laid on his back for many years doing it, and he hated it. And he tried to quit many, many times. And the Pope's like, no, finish it. So he had a big impact. So he was in Rome a lot doing that stuff. And then he is buried in Florence. And when we went to Florence, I knew he was buried there, but I couldn't remember the name of the church. Like we were just walking, hanging out. We sat on the steps and she was talking to us before we went to dinner. And then I was like, dude, when later, I'm like, that's where he's buried. Like, I didn't realize that was the church. So later, I left early. I always went out really early and took pictures, like between sunrise till 8 o'clock when we had to leave. I would go out and explore by myself. I went back to that church and I touched the wall, like, he's in here. You know, like those kind of things our teachers do that are weirdos like me. And I took pictures of every little detail. I'm like, he's buried inside here. Like he walked on these steps, he walked through these streets. It's just interesting to be somewhere you know someone so amazing was at. So this one is Raphael's, and it's the School of Athens. It's depicting a whole array of figures from pre-Christian classical to antiquity. So you have different people in there. Does he want you guys down there at 25?
Just 30, like normal, 3:30.
Okay, so you leave at 25, you'll be down there by 3:30?
We can leave at 3:30, and then we'll head down at 3:30.
Okay. Wasn't sure, because last time you guys left a few minutes from now. So this is a really good, I need a pointer. This is a really good example of like the perspective. So right here is the point of 1 point perspective, and everything comes from there. He was also very good about depicting himself in the paintings. That's him right there. So he would always stick himself kind of somewhere in his paintings. But there's Socrates is in the middle. It's like the School of Athens. People are looking, they're writing, they're doing things. There's a ton of symbolism in here. I honestly didn't think I'd get this far, so I didn't write it all down. So if you want to come back and see some of this stuff, I can tell you. But this is all painted on. Like this is painted, this is painted, this is a flat wall. Like this is painted on to get that perspective. You can see down here, these are painted on, and then this is the stuff that comes forward just a little bit. So a lot of this stuff doesn't look like it's painted on, but it is. So this makes it look like it goes back, but this is a flat wall. okay? So like these are just different people throughout history. I can't remember who they all are off the top of my head because I was gonna write those down. But Socrates going through, his hand going up, that's really, remember the Last Supper Leonardo painted, the hands going up, and that one it has a lot of, I know a lot of those symbols and stuff, but like you kind of have that triangle, you kind of have this triangle here, so there's a lot of those things that they kind of put into it. There's so much symbolism in these paintings, it's unreal, and like what they thought about, what they did, how they added those things in. Okay, and then it goes into the Baroque. So the Renaissance really was just like that page, but it was such a time that things were changing so fast, and the art went from Giotto, who was like the godfather of the Renaissance, kind of flat, to these very magnificent, very 3D. Like Giotto tried to do a little perspective in his, but it was still not perfect yet. He was like the beginning of it. And then as it kind of went through, you start to see things getting more realistic, and like they start to use atmospheric perspective where things closer have more detail and more color, farther away lighter. It's kind of like, you guys know how Asian landscapes are kind of just built up with like foggy stuff in between. So it's kind of reminded me of some of like the same kind of feeling as those artworks, because they were learning how to do these things. And I always equate it to like my students. You start off and you draw what you think you see, but until you know the rules, and then you draw, you get better and better and better. And that's like, it just took a long time to get better because they had to learn these things, okay? Now, think of technology, how fast it went from the 1900s to the 1980s, and then from the 1980s till now, it was like very slow, boom, to like crazy, like robots that do everything for you. So it was like a huge boom. That's what it was for the Renaissance. Think of the Renaissance as the technology boom, but for art, it just took a little longer. Baroque art. We'll do this slide and then I think we'll be done. So this is the late 1500s to the 1700s. It's a time of intense and increasing conflict, turmoil, and equality in Europe. So people are starting to be like, we don't want the church in charge of everything we do. Separation church, you know, like stuff. They want to be a little more independent. First, this first one. This is Caravaggio's The Decapitation of Saint John Baptist. So it shows the decapitation of him. How dramatic the Baroque art shifted away from the composure of the Renaissance, was usually more of the divine and like nice divine, showing kind of that kind of a thing, more religious. Whereas this is religious but showing the not so good side, like the war part of it. Because there's always been like religion and war, because everyone wants everyone to believe what they believe, and other people are like, no, we believe it. So there's always conflict throughout time with the different religions and the wars and who's in charge, who's doing this kind of a thing. So you'll kind of see that. It shifted away from the composure of the Renaissance art into a realm of greater tension, energy, emotion, and power. This one in particular was known for the chiaroscuro, which is a dramatic between light and dark. So when you look at this one, notice how very bright, very bright, very bright. So it's real dark all around it, and that dramatic lighting is bringing you here. You follow his arm to there. You go back and you go up and you look, and it kind of is like a circle that you follow. So when you look, you like kind of follow that, and it moves you around, that chiaroscuro. So don't get that confused with the other word for the S curve and the foot going forward, kind of a thing. And then we have the most significant Baroque artist was Bernini, and he's well known for the work of the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, which is pictured here. It reveals the way the Baroque art often ties to move viewers to greater, higher religious faith. This is beautiful. So when you see it up close, but this is in a church, and it's up at the top, like right in the middle, right above. So when you see it, it's like this gold is coming down. This is all gold around it, and it's beautiful, and it's shining down. They have it lit up, and it's like shining down on this sculpture, and it's like the church is huge, but all you're looking at is that, and it's coming down. So more of the dramatic business of that. And then we have the Dutch Baroque artist Rembrandt. He is the late self-portrait, or his late self-portraits are considered masterpieces of the exquisite depiction of our inner lives. So artists have always kind of done selfies and self-portraits in there, but he was kind of like one of the first ones to kind of make it important. So you see that same lighting, when you look at it, it's all dark and you look towards his face, that contrast. Okay, so you got that dark lighting up the face to make it important. And you can see he's painting himself as he is, not idealistically like the Greeks and the Romans used to do. Okay? All right. So we got your Baroque art. If you have questions,